Alrighty, welcome back to another video, and in this one, what we're going to be doing is working on this connection status component. However, before we hop right into that, I want to mention a few updates I made between the last video and this one. So the first one is I built out this network select modal, and I figured that I didn't really want to make a video about this because the logic is pretty much the exact same as the select account modal, and it just felt a little bit repetitive. Wanted to save you guys some time. Another thing that I did is I added a little bit of scroll logic. As you can see, a little responsiveness. So you see when the screen is wide that these two top cards, they are displaying in a row to the left and right of each other. And then I just have it where if it gets to a certain size, a breakpoint, I think it's 900 pixels, then it just turns to a column instead. And then the last little change I did is, you know how I said that we were gonna break out that edit button component since we pretty much had, I don't know, just to dry up the code a little bit. So I now have in components this edit button where you just pass it on click handler. And of course that is this button right here, this pencil icon. So with that being said, what we're gonna do is start working on this connection status component. And for this, what I want to have for the logic is we already track which devices you're connected to. There's a plane flying overhead, don't mind that. And the connection status for a certain network, because remember, like I said, that I can be connected to this iMac through multiple networks. However, whenever we're writing the speed test app, we just want to check if the connection exists over a certain network. So that is in, where is it? Network account online statuses. So it is keyed by the network ID. And then in here, we have the account number for the device. And it's going to say if it's online or offline for that network. So of course, whenever we write this component, we need at least two connection statuses. Is it connected or is it disconnected? Now, I'm also going to include a third connection status, something to display here called invalid. And that is just if you don't have either one of these selected. For example, you have a network but no device, then I'm just going to display invalid here because, I don't know, it just feels a bit strange saying disconnected if you don't even have the proper information to determine the connection status. So on that note, let me go ahead and first and foremost start adding those types for connections. So I'm going to make a new type file. And I'm gonna make a new enum, and I'll just say connection status. So again, that is connected, and this will just be equal to the string connected. And then I'll make one for disconnected and invalid. So disconnected and invalid in case you don't have one of those items selected. All right, looking good. That's all we need in here. Now let me just go ahead and export this. So from connections, export connection status. And the reason that I want to put it in here rather than in the component itself whenever you write it is because we're going to need it in a couple different places. So on that note, ready to move on. Actually, let me keep this open. So of course, we're going to need this connection status and also the styles file eventually. However, what I'm going to do before I start writing any code in here is I am actually going to make a new hook. And this hook is going to basically say that for the active account number and the active ID, active account number and active network ID, then it's just going to return a Boolean to say, are you connected to this device through this network or not? Now, I want to make it a hook rather than just writing it in this component because we're actually going to be using this same logic for the main button too. Now, for the main button, we'll say that if you are not connected, then we're going to disable this button because, of course, it doesn't make sense to, enable the button if you can't send any requests to any other device. So since we're going to be using that same logic in this component and also in this component right here, that's why I want to split it out into a hook. So on that, let me just go ahead and make a new directory and also show you how I set up my hooks. I'll say hooks, and For the hook naming convention, I prefix everything with use. And I don't know, I just really like that pattern. So I'll say, make a new TypeScript file. I'll say use is connected. All right, and now let me go ahead and import everything we're gonna need. All right, so to make a hook, I'll say const use is connected, and this is gonna be equal to actually a function that's gonna return a Boolean. And then let me just export this right now. So export default use is connected. And another thing that I want to do before I even start writing out the meat and potatoes of this is go ahead and make a new type file, index, and kind of like how we set up the types or the store where we have this index, or excuse me, not the store, these types right here where we have this index file and it kind of aggregates all of these just to make the imports a little bit cleaner. It's the same thing that I want to do with hooks. So I'm going to import use is connected from apps, speed test, hooks, use is connected, and then I'll just export that. All right, so this is the basic structure for how we're going to be writing all of these hooks. Again, I'm just going to name the file whatever the hook is and then just export it right here. But now, with that being said, let's go ahead and write this. So the first thing that we need to do is for this hook, we need to pull in the active account and the active network. So to do that, it is, let's say, const equal to a useSelector for get active account number, and then do the same for active network. All right, so pulling in the active account number and active network. Now from here, once we have those two values, again, like I said, what we need to do is we need to check in Redux under system network account online statuses, because again, this is keyed by the network ID, which is going to be the active network, and then the account number under it, which is going to be our active account right here. And from that, we're going to pull the value to see if it's online or offline. So let me go ahead and make another, pull in the network account online statuses, and those are pulled in from this selector right here. Now for the return value, what I can do is just use memo. And for this, all right. So for the first bit of the logic, I'm just going to say that if you don't have any active account or any network selected, if one of these is blank, then we're just going to return false off the bat, because if you don't have a key piece in that connection, then there's no way that it could possibly be connected. I mean, so if no active account number or no active network ID, then I'm just going to return false. Now, aside from this, if you do have both of these pieces of information right here, so let me go ahead and select, I do have an active account now and an active network ID. Then we're going to go ahead and look in here to see what the status is. So otherwise, what we want to do is we want to return from network account online statuses, and we want to key it by active network ID. Now, another thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to throw in a question mark right here. Now, the reason that I have this, and this probably isn't going to happen too often, but it is a situation we need to look out for, is there's going to be times where you have an active account number or active network ID in your speed test app. However, that doesn't exist in the system data. Now, if you're like, well, when's that going to be the case? Because whenever we select one of these, we're essentially selecting from the system data. Well, the situation where that would happen is, let's say that you have an active network selected right here, the New Boston network. Well, if you go in here in your system data and you delete this right here, this is going to delete it from the system data. However, it isn't going to update everywhere in all these different apps and kind of look for this network ID. So we need to account for the fact that we can indeed have a network ID as our active network ID that doesn't exist in the system anymore. So that is why we're just including this question mark right here to say, if you don't have this, then it's undefined, don't flip out or anything like that. But if we do have it, then under network account online statuses, the next thing we need to do is key in the active account number. And then to see if this is online or not, we're just going to say, is this equal to online status dot online? Now, if this is true, then it's going to return true. And of course, false, false, yada, yada, simple stuff. And that is our hook logic to say, are we connected to this account over this network? So now that we have that, what I want to do is pop back in here into my connection status component, and we can start right in this logic. All right, so let me go ahead and import that hook we just wrote. And that's called use is connected from apps.speedtest.hooks. Now another thing that we're going to need is actually this right here, both of these values. Get active account number and get active network ID. And then the last thing that we're going to need to import is this connection status type. And what I actually want to do is import the connection status from apps speedtest types. However, because this type is called connection status and that this component I'm working on is also called connection status, what I'm going to do whenever I have these naming conflicts is I just import it as T connection status. So this is the type connection status, and then this, of course, refers to the component. All right, so now let me just sort this a little bit. Okay, so I want to pull in these, the active account number and active network ID, because remember, we can't just use this use is connected on its own, because in our connection status, this use is connected Boolean, or this hook, is pretty much going to say, are we connected or disconnected? However, the reason that we need to pull in these is because we need to check if one of them don't exist at all. And if they don't, then we're just going to say that this connection status is invalid. So let me go ahead and say const is connected is equal to this hook right here. And now we can go ahead and write a function to get our connection status. So const, I'll store it in a variable called connection status and say use memo. And the reason that I'm using a memo is because I don't want to have to recalculate this on every render, only if one of these key values is changed. So just a little bit better, I don't know, performance, I guess. And of course, this function is going to return one of these connection statuses right here. So I'll just type it out to make sure we're returning right value. And also, maybe I can steal this as well. All right. So just like here, whenever we didn't have one of those active account numbers or active network ID, we returned false. We're going to kind of follow the same logic here. However, instead of returning false, since we need to return one of these connection statuses, in this case, we're going to return connection status invalid. Now, if we do have an active account number and active ID, then all we really need to do is convert this is connected Boolean to either connected or disconnected connection status. So I'll say return is connected. If you are connected, then I'll say T connection status. Connected is the status that you want. Otherwise, T connection status dot disconnected is what we're going to be returning. Now let me just update my dependencies and all right, good to go. So now this connection status memoize function is going to return one of these properly. And now from here, let's see. Well, the first thing we're going to be doing with this is we'll pass it along to this icon. And eventually in here, we're going to accept the prop of the status. And depending on that prop, it knows whether to display a, we'll say a green value for connected, a red one for disconnected, and we'll use gray for invalid. So since we're going to be doing that, I'll pass it along as status. And again, this is throwing us error because we didn't type this out, but we'll fix that in just a second. Now, another thing that I want to do is I want to write the function to render this text right here. So we'll just say connected, disconnected, or maybe for invalid. I don't want to say invalid. That's kind of weird. Maybe I'll put a dash or something. So I'll say const render text. And this is just going to be, let me make a text. All right, so I'll have each of these keys be either, okay. So for connected, I'll just say connected. Let me just copy this, save some time. Now for disconnected, we'll just render the text disconnected. And then if it is invalid, I'll just write a dash like this. For some reason, I just think invalid feels a little bit, I don't know, weird. Yeah, let's just do this. So return text. And the key of this is, where are you at? Connection status. All right, so in here, I'm gonna do render text. And all right, I think our text is good to go. We are passing along the connection status to this icon. Now let's go ahead and style that icon right now. So in that styles file, we are gonna need the connection status type. And we don't need to import it as that. And then we passed it in as status. So in here, we'll say status is going to be equal to connection status. And again, what happens whenever you're using styled components is it's actually going to pass all of these props through. However, we don't need to type in everything out because, well, in here, it doesn't really care about all those different props. So this is kind of just type scripting to make this happy. And by the way, another thing I noticed is, let me see if I can pull this up. In one of my earlier tutorials, I was typing this out and I said vertical height and vertical width. Of course, vertical width doesn't even make sense, those two words together. So that's actually a viewport height and viewport width. I just thought that was a kind of funny thing whenever I was editing. But either way, let's get back on track here. So what I'm also going to be doing is importing this CSS snippet right here. And the reason for that is because in this, I can actually delete this color. And what we're going to do is we'll say for these props that are passed in, what we'll do is we'll check the status and we'll say if the status is equal to connection status dot connected, then what we want to do is return a mixin. And I already have these mixins written. Now we don't have to do it this way and use mixins like this. What we could do is we could just say like something like this, like the color property, and do all the status logic right here. However, in my experience, every time I did this, I always end up adding more properties and it's just a little bit more repetitive. So using mixins, I just think is a little bit cleaner, even though we're only working on one property right here. It seems kind of repetitive, but I don't know. I just like this format and it saves me from having to go back and kind of like rewrite this logic and separate it out into a mixin. So now the cool thing about this is we can add different properties right here. But I think we're just going to stick with color. But anyways, that's my little spiel. You hear that noise? I think like people are throwing garbage down the garbage chute. So, all right. So if the status is equal to disconnected, then I just want to render out this disconnected mixin. And again, all this is doing is just changing the color of the button. And now last but not least, I'll say if connection status is equal to invalid, then I want to do this, render this invalid mixin, which is going to turn this icon to gray. Now I'm getting an error right here. And this is just say that not all code paths return a value. And it's just kind of a weird thing because I guess the styled components aren't smart enough, or TypeScript, whatever this combination is, to know that this is indeed always going to return a value. So to fix this, all we have to do is just write return here, and we'll be good to go. And I think this actually might be it. Okay, so let's check it out. All right, this is pretty good right here. So it says disconnected, and let me just verify. Okay, I'm not connected to my iMac right now. And now let me just get rid of one of these, and that should be invalid. And remember, the text for invalid was this little hyphen. And then let me actually, give me a second. Let me pop open my laptop because I just want to test that connection status again. So 1 second. Booting open. My iMac is booting open TNBOS right now. So there we go, popped open, and all right, cool. So you see it is indeed connected, and let me just make sure this is working. I'm not connected to my Linux desktop. And now let me just go ahead and shut off TNBOS on my iMac. All right, looking sweet. So there you go. There is our beautiful connection status component. And let's see what we got up next. All right, so next up, now that this is taken care of, we'll go ahead and hop and start working on this main button right here.